Part 1 expanded approximately 700 words. The night on the Texas frontier had a way of whispering danger long before it showed its face. Clara Jennings had learned to listen to those whispers. Living alone in a weather-beaten cabin miles from the nearest settlement, she had grown familiar with the creaks of her porch, the shift of the wind across the plains, the distant howls of coyotes. But tonight felt different. The air was too still, the silence too tight, as if the land itself was waiting. She was stringing up dried herbs near the stove when the pounding came, 3 harsh, frantic thuds that rattled the hinges. Clara froze. No one knocked like that unless fear was driving their hand. She reached instinctively for the rifle beside the door, cocking it with a steady hand though her heart thundered. "Who's there?" she called, her voice firm. No answer, only the rasping sound of someone struggling to breathe. She unlatched the door a mere inch and peered out. Moonlight washed over a tall figure swaying on her doorstep, bare-chested, bleeding, an arrow lodged deep in his shoulder. His dark eyes met hers with a mix of agony and defiance. A Comanche, a warrior. Before Clara could react, he collapsed forward, landing hard against the wooden boards. She gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. His skin was hot with fever, his breath shallow. Behind him, far in the distance, she heard the unmistakable thunder of horses. More than one, a posse, white men, settlers, ranchers, maybe even soldiers, out for blood. Clara's pulse hammered. If they found him here, they would assume she was helping him. They wouldn't listen to reason. Not in times like these, not with tensions high and tempers higher. Frontier law was often no law at all. She looked down at the warrior. He had dragged himself to her door, seeking shelter, or at least a final chance at survival. His life was slipping through her fingers. "Lord help me," she whispered. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Clara hooked her arms beneath his shoulders and heaved. He was heavy, his dead weight nearly pulling her down, but adrenaline carried her. Inch by inch she dragged him inside, kicking the door closed with her heel. She barely had time to catch her breath before the riders reached her yard, hooves kicking up dirt and sparks. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness. Men shouted orders to each other, rifles glinting. A fist hammered on her door. "Miss Jennings, you in there?" Clara straightened her dress, forced her trembling legs to hold steady, and opened the door just enough to show her face. "Evenin', Sheriff," she said calmly. Sheriff Dorman, a broad-shouldered man with suspicion carved into every line of his face, peered past her like he expected to see blood on the floor. "We're tracking a hostile Comanche, wounded, dangerous, came through here." Clara's stomach twisted. She had hidden the warrior in the cellar beneath a loose floorboard and covered him with a quilt. She prayed he had enough strength to stay silent. "No one's come this way," she said smoothly, gripping the door to hide the shake in her hand. "I've been inside all night." Dorman narrowed his eyes. "Mind if we take a look?" Clara forced a polite smile. "I do mind, actually. You know the law. You can search my land, but not my home without cause." The sheriff didn't like that, but he also knew she was right. "Fine. Boys, spread out." Lanterns and hoofbeats scattered across her property. Men stomped around her barn, checked her well, circled her chicken coop. One even peered into her windows, but the heavy curtains revealed nothing. Inside the cellar, Clara knew the warrior lay motionless, fighting for breath while strangers hunted him like an animal. Minutes crawled by. Finally, the sheriff returned. "Tracks disappear near your place. If you see anything at all, you call for us." "I will," she lied. When the posse finally thundered away, Clara locked the door, bolted it, and rushed to the cellar. She lifted the floorboard to find the warrior pale and shaking, his eyes glassy with pain. "You're safe," she whispered, kneeling beside him. She cleaned the wound, dug out the arrowhead as gently as she could, stitched the torn flesh with trembling fingers. He barely flinched, too weak to react. As she bandaged his shoulder, his lips parted. A whisper escaped, rough, accented, but unmistakably English. Part 2 expanded approximately 700 words. Clara barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin made her jolt awake, expecting the sheriff to return or the wounded warrior to cry out in pain. But the cabin remained eerily still, as if holding its breath. Dawn crept slowly across the plains, leaking through cracks in her shutters in thin lines of gold. When Clara finally rose and lifted the cellar door, she froze. The pallet was empty. The quilt she'd tucked around him was neatly folded and placed on the table, her bandages gone, the small jar of salve she'd left uncorked. The Comanche warrior, wounded, feverish, barely conscious hours ago, had vanished into the early morning light. For a long moment she just stood there, gripping the edge of the cellar door, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. She stepped outside, scanning the yard. The earth still held the faint imprint of his bare feet, leading toward the treeline west of her property. She followed them a few steps, then stopped. Beyond that line of mesquite trees stretched miles of raw, unforgiving land, ravines, dry riverbeds, hidden passes only the Comanche knew. He was gone. Clara exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Part of her felt lighter knowing he had escaped the posse. Another part felt strangely hollow. She had saved his life, risked her own, and now she would never know whether he survived the forest with such a wound. As she returned to the cabin, a strange sound drifted toward her, low, rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat echoing across the plains. Clara paused on the porch, head tilted. The sound grew louder, the rhythm steady and unmistakable. A drum. Her pulse quickened. Drums out here meant only one thing. The ground trembled beneath her feet long before she saw them. A faint vibration, like a distant storm rolling across the earth. Clara ran to the edge of her property, hand shielding her eyes from the rising sun. At first she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but then she saw the movement. Silhouettes on horseback cresting the ridge. She squinted, her mouth going dry as shapes grew clearer. Riders. Dozens of them. Warriors. Comanche. Her heart lurched. They descended the hill like a tide, silent, disciplined, utterly controlled. Their horses moved with eerie precision, forming a wide arc as they approached her homestead. The sun glinted off spears, bows, rifles slung across backs. Faces painted with streaks of red, white, and black. Not a word spoken, just the beat of the single drum, carried by one rider at the rear. Clara stumbled backward onto the porch, gripping the railing to keep her knees from buckling. She'd heard tales of raids, cabins burned, settlers killed or taken captive. She had never believed half of them, but now the stories crawled to life in her mind like spiders. She forced herself to stand tall. If she was going to die, she'd face it on her feet. As the warriors halted in a wide circle around her yard, their horses snorting clouds of steam into the cool morning air, one rider separated from the rest. He moved with authority, his painted chest rising and falling in long, even breaths. His posture was proud, commanding. It was him, the wounded man, except now he looked anything but wounded. He sat tall and straight in the saddle, his hair braided neatly down his back, a new leather vest covering the stitches she had sewn into his shoulder. The feverish glaze was gone from his eyes, replaced by something sharp, intense, unmistakably powerful. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out. He dismounted in one graceful motion, boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. Then he walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate. His warriors watched without blinking, their expressions unreadable. Fear clawed at Clara's insides. Should she speak? Should she run? Should she bow? She had no idea what gesture was respectful or offensive. Her breath caught as the warrior stopped only a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint mark of her stitches beneath his vest. He lifted a hand and touched his shoulder, acknowledging the wound she had mended. "You saved me," he said, his English clearer now, though still accented. "Your people hunted me, but you chose differently." Clara swallowed hard, forcing her voice to steady. "You were dying. I couldn't stand by and watch." He nodded slowly, studying her with a gaze that seemed to look through her, not at her. "My name is Tahan," he said. "War leader of my band." Her blood turned cold. War leader. Not just a warrior. A man whose authority could determine whether she lived or died. The circle of riders tightened imperceptibly, horses shifting. But Tahan raised a hand, and the movement ceased instantly. "You showed courage," he said. "Greater courage than many warriors I have known." Part 3 expanded approximately 700 words. Clara held her breath as Tahan's voice rolled across the clearing in smooth, commanding waves. The Comanche language was sharp in places, fluid in others, like wind cutting through canyon stone. Though she couldn't understand the words, she could feel the weight of them. His warriors listened with the kind of rigid attention that could make a person's bones rattle. When he finished, silence settled like dust. Then, without a signal she could see, 3 riders moved forward. Clara gasped and stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorknob behind her. The warriors dismounted with a fluid grace that reminded her of panthers, silent, assured, deadly. She braced herself, expecting demands, accusations, perhaps even punishment for interfering in their affairs. But the first warrior knelt and laid a thick bundle on the ground, soft, tan buffalo hides, beautifully tanned, edges stitched with beads that glimmered in the sunlight. The second placed a carved wooden figurine at her feet, a stylized horse, painted with ochre symbols, small enough to fit in her palm, yet crafted with such care it radiated meaning. The third reached into a woven pouch and spilled its contents: dried venison, herbs tied in little bundles, a flint and steel kit, several smooth river stones wrapped in leather. Clara blinked, confused. They were gifts. She had not expected this. She had prepared herself for every possible outcome except gratitude. Tahan approached again, his steps slow and deliberate. When he stopped before her, his presence felt so large it seemed to take up all the air between them. "You gave freely," he said. "So we give freely." Clara swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. In our way," he explained, "when a life is saved, especially that of a war leader, it creates a bond. A debt that must be honored." His eyes softened, just slightly. "If I had died last night, my warriors would have carried my name into the next world. But you pulled me back." Clara's pulse trembled in her throat. "I only did what any decent person would have done." Tahan tilted his head, considering her words like an unfamiliar concept. "No," he said finally. "Many would have let me die." He stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell the faint scent of horse and sage on him. "You have our respect, our gratitude." The words vibrated in her chest, heavy, real, impossible to ignore. Respect, gratitude, from a people whose paths rarely crossed settlers except in bloodshed. Clara's knees wobbled from the collision of relief and disbelief. "I don't know what to say." Tahan lifted his chin toward the bundle of gifts. "Say nothing, except what is given." He turned and addressed his warriors again. This time the tone was ceremonial, reverent. Several riders struck their chests with closed fists. Others lowered their heads for a moment before straightening sharply. Clara felt a strange electric shiver dance along her spine. Something sacred was happening, something she had no frame of reference for, yet felt honored to witness. When Tahan finished the ceremony, he returned to stand before her once more. "You are under our protection now," he said plainly. Clara's lips parted in astonishment. Protection? From Comanche warriors? She almost laughed, partly from shock, partly from the absurdity of it. If her neighbors ever discovered this, she'd be run out of town on a rail. Or worse. But there was no mockery in Tahan's voice. No threat, only sincerity. "If danger comes to you, from outlaws, from settlers, from any hand raised against you, you will not face it alone." Clara blinked rapidly. Why would you do that for me?" Tahan touched the scar beneath his vest, the one she had stitched. "Because you did not see an enemy," he said. "You saw a man, and that choice has power." Emotion swelled inside her so fast it nearly knocked her breath away. She had spent years alone, carving out a life with nothing but grit and stubbornness. Yet in one night, she had altered the course of her fate without realizing it. Tahan angled his gaze toward the rocky ridge behind her cabin. "There is a high place above your land, the hill that watches the valley." "I know it," Clara whispered. She often climbed it to watch storms roll across the plains. "If you need us," he said, "light a fire there. A signal of smoke in daylight or flame at night. We will come." Her heart thudded painfully. I don't know what to say." "You have already spoken," Tahan replied. "With your actions." For a long moment they stood in silence, two worlds meeting in a fragile, unexpected understanding. Then Tahan turned, swinging onto his horse in a fluid motion. He raised his hand, and the warriors responded instantly, drawing back into formation. With a sharp cry, almost musical in its wildness, he led them away. The herd of horses thundered across the valley, kicking up dust that shimmered in the morning sun. Within seconds, they vanished into the horizon, fading like a mirage. Clara remained on her porch, the gifts at her feet, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The world felt bigger now, more dangerous, more beautiful, more connected than she'd ever imagined. She had saved a wounded Comanche, and in return, she had received something no settler on the frontier could ever dream of. The protection, and perhaps the friendship, of a Comanche war leader. But deep inside, beneath the shock and wonder, Clara felt something else flicker to life. A certainty. This was not the last time she would see Tahan.